Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dwayne Heisler. I'm with the Pennsylvania Policy Center and thrilled that you have joined us today for our federal policy action call. These policy action calls are part of a series that are held on the first and the third Thursday at 1 o'clock every month. And our purpose with this is to help to educate on policies that really benefit everyone, not just billionaires and big corporations. It's a chance for us to focus on learning and collective action. Today's session is going to be a very informative discussion. We have some top policy folks and advocates that are leaders in Pennsylvania that will be on the call today. And just for a little bit of housekeeping, all attendees' lines are muted to reduce background noise. However, this is interactive and questions are welcome. You can just drop your questions in the Zoom chat at any time. And our moderator, Jeff, when we get to the questions and answer, will get through as many as possible towards the end of the call. If there are any tech support issues, audio, video issues, just message our teammate Adrian in the chat, and she will try to assist you and help you with that. So, once again, I'm Dwayne Heisler. I'm the campaign director for the Pennsylvania Policy Center, and I'd like to start by turning it over to our executive director, Felicity Williams.
Thank you, Dwayne. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining our Pennsylvania Policy Center Federal Action Call, Building a Livable Wage Economy for All. For those of you who may be new to these calls, as Dwayne said, my name is Felicity Williams, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center. I want to begin by thanking our incredible speakers for being with us today, and each of you for taking time out of your day to join this conversation. At Pennsylvania Policy Center, we've spent a lot of time talking about affordability because we hear from Pennsylvanians who are working hard, doing everything right, and still struggling to get ahead. Families are facing rising costs for housing, groceries, childcare, healthcare, transportation, and other essentials. And while there are many factors contributing to that reality, one thing is clear. Pennsylvania's affordability crisis is also a wage crisis. Pennsylvania's minimum wage remains stuck at just $7.25 an hour and far below every neighboring state. It has not increased since 2009, nearly 17 years ago. Meanwhile, the cost of living continues to rise, leaving too many workers working harder than ever, but falling further behind. This is not just an economic issue. It is also a racial justice issue, a gender issue, and a family issue. More than 865,000 Pennsylvanian workers would benefit from raising the minimum wage, including a disproportionate share of women, workers of colors, and parents. And as we'll discuss today, the history of our wage laws, particularly the tipped wage system, remains deeply connected to longstanding inequities that continue to shape economic outcomes today. That's why I'm so excited about today's conversation. We'll start here shortly by hearing from Representative Chris Rabb, who last year introduced legislation to establish a living wage in Pennsylvania. Representative Rabb has helped push an important conversation about what it truly takes to build an economy where work is rewarded with dignity and economic security. We'll also hear special recorded remarks from Congressman Chris Deluzio, a co-sponsor of the Living Wage for All Act, which was introduced on April 28 of this year. We're grateful for Congressman Deluzio's leadership and his support for building an economy where one job is enough to live on. We'll then hear from Nevitt of Keystone Progress Education Fund, who will discuss coalition efforts and advocacy happening across Pennsylvania and beyond. And finally, we'll hear from Saru, president of One Fair Wage and one of the nation's leading voices on wage justice, who will help us separate fact from fiction when it comes to common myths about livable wages and share the latest developments in the national movement. I know this will be an informative and inspiring conversation, and I look forward to the discussion ahead. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Representative Chris Rabb.
Thank you so much. Hey, folks, Rep. Rabb here. I'm in the Pennsylvania Convention Center at the Netroots Nation Conference. And I'm so glad I could pop on before my next panel. But I really appreciate all of you showing up, not just in this moment, but for a much bigger cause. And that's a living wage for all. I was proud to sponsor, with the help of the Living Wage for All Coalition, introduce a Living Wage for All bill that is aggressively bold, but entirely long overdue, and so rarely talked about in the most meaningful ways, because we talk about the bare minimum. And I don't want to talk about a minimum wage. I want to talk about a living wage. We need to talk about abundance and not scarcity. We need to talk about generosity and not minimalism. We need to understand that this is something that is not just something that increases the wage for those folks who are earning poverty wages, but it's something that benefits everyone. It benefits the entire Commonwealth. Because what happens when folks are generously compensated on the front end? They reinvest that in their local communities, and they're able to do so much more. And this is one of the best anti-poverty initiatives you can imagine, is having a living wage for all. And we also have to remember too that it's not just about increasing the wage, but expanding eligibility. So my bill expands eligibility of the minimum wage to include gig workers, to include incarcerated workers, where in Pennsylvania, the starting hourly wage is 19 cents, and abolishes the tipped minimum wage, which was referred to earlier, which is a holdover of Jim Crow, where after slavery, white employers in the South did not want to pay for black labor. So they're like, oh yeah, well, if you tip, then that's fine, but we're not going to give them anything. So even the whitest, most rural community in Pennsylvania, where people are struggling, they're in poverty, working hard because of racism. So it's an example of how our fates are intertwined and how we have to address these systems of harm by being broadly generous and mindful that we can't leave anyone behind, which is why it's about a living wage for all, because too long, over generations of policymaking, people have marginalized or otherwise excluded people because they're not part of the political equation. And going forward, we need to make sure that when we have these policies, it helps everyone up. So anything I can do, my last day in office is November 30th before I go to Congress. But in my role as a state lawmaker and as a troublemaker and as someone who believes in organizing and the collective genius of those closest to the pain, I will do whatever I can to be the advocate we all deserve in the state legislature, and to helping make sure that the next generation of lawmakers and the amazing ones we have now do the work we all demand.
Thank you so much, Representative Rabb. So inspiring. I don't know if you had a chance to see all of the applause that you were receiving. We are thrilled that you were able to join us today. Your leadership in our state legislature has been incredible. When we were talking about this, immediately your name came up like, we need to get Representative Rabb here. And what I'm really looking forward to is your leadership in this Congress. That is what I'm looking forward to too, because this is a national issue as well as a Pennsylvania issue. And I have so much more confidence that we're going to see things moving because you are on it. And just really appreciate you. Thank you so much, Representative Rabb. And with that, maybe it's appropriate, since we're talking about Congress, Adrian, can we cue up the message that we got from Representative Deluzio? Representative Deluzio was originally scheduled to be here, but once again, the leader that he is, he got tied up and was unable to join, but last night submitted a video for us. So we're all ready to see that message from the Congressman.
Congressman Chris Deluzio here. Thank you, Pennsylvania Policy Center, for the invitation to speak and for bringing everybody together for this action call. As many of you know, I proudly represent Western Pennsylvania down in Congress, a region full of a lot of hardworking people, and a state, a commonwealth full of hardworking people who have been faced with far too many ripoffs in life lately. The lack of a livable wage in our state and across the country is pretty high on that list. Now, a lot has changed in our country in the last 17 years, but the Pennsylvania and the federal minimum wage, they have not. Both are still $7.25 an hour. We all know that $7.25 an hour can't buy a house or support a family or even rent a one-bedroom apartment nearly anywhere. It's not a livable wage. What it means to be working class and middle class, they may have changed a lot in our country. Today, The median age for first-time home buyers is now the highest on record. It's 40 years old. In 1981, it was 29. The American dream has gotten far too out of reach for folks. The system is still stacked against hardworking people, and it's rigged for the ultra-rich and the biggest corporations. We saw this happen in Western Pennsylvania, when a lot of policies, including bad trade deals, shipped solid Western PA jobs to wherever the labor and environmental rules were the weakest. It devastated American steel industry and so many others, just like it hurt the Western Pennsylvania workers who powered those industries. The Trump administration now has made economic inequality worse to the benefit of the rich and powerful. Trump and MAGA Republicans, they passed the big ugly bill last year. What did it do? It made the biggest cuts ever to healthcare, the biggest cuts ever to food assistance, all to pay for tax giveaways to the ultra rich and massive corporations. And it was fiscally reckless because it jacked up the national debt, saddling future generations with the cost of these giveaways. It's no surprise that a lot of hardworking people are falling more and more behind in Donald Trump's economy. We know that $7.25 an hour isn't enough. We also know that a lot of people make more than federal minimum wage and yet still aren't getting their slice of the American dream. Let's look at the bigger picture. Personal incomes are falling, personal savings are being drained, and savings rates are slowing down. The overwhelming majority of people in this country are seeing any wealth they may have saved up wiped out by inflation, all while the highest income Americans are getting richer and spending more. These are not good signs for our economy. We need a government that helps build an economy that rewards work, not just wealth. Let's pass the Raise the Wage Act, which would give a raise to $17 an hour by 2030 to 22 million Americans who've earned it and waited long enough. Some policies go further, like the Living Wage for All Act that I'm proud to co-sponsor. It would set us on a path to $25 an hour by 2031 for big employers and a little later on for some smaller businesses. The bill would give the federal minimum wage the serious restructuring it needs and make sure it never again falls behind the cost of living. We also need to unrig our tax code, which taxes regular paychecks at higher rates than investment returns from things like capital gains and dividends and carried interest. Look, over the last 17 years, we've heard the same excuses from the same politicians carrying water for the powerful and corrupt that have rigged our system. Yet here's the truth. Things are way too expensive and they've gotten worse. We are in a cost of living emergency. From this reckless regime change war taking American lives and raising prices at home to the corruption that seems to have no end in sight, it's clear the Trump administration has failed. Now, raising the current poverty wage to a livable wage is one of the biggest fights of our time. It gets at a lot of things: cost of living, workers' rights, economic security, and earning that slice of the American dream. And people have waited long enough. Congress could act today to do this. The bills I laid out would do just that. Our Republican leadership should put these bills on the floor now. I won't hold my breath. Amidst all the noise and the cuts and the chaos, I want you to know that I'm not giving up on this fight in Congress, and know that accountability and more oversight of this Trump administration, it must come. The road ahead, I'm sure, will be bumpy, but I think we can get some hard and good things done together. I know with your help at the Pennsylvania Policy Center, we will finally raise pay in this country so that people can afford their lives and we can build an economy that rewards hard work and not just wealth. Thank you for all that you do.
Well, if you've not seen Representative Deluzio before, you can see why he is a champion, so focused on the things that everyday families need in Pennsylvania, which of course align perfectly with the mission of the Pennsylvania Policy Center, is to make sure that Pennsylvanians can thrive and not just get by. And we can't do that if we're making poverty wages. So very thankful to Representative Deluzio. And just a little heads up, Representative Deluzio would like to come back and actually appear live on a future call. And so we'll be sure to let you know when that is going to happen, and maybe even show up for one of our live events too. So if you've signed up for this meeting here, you will receive that information of when you can see him next. So want to thank you. And this is a good point actually right now to remind folks, please put your questions in the chat so that we can facilitate those when we get to the end of the call. Want to make sure that we can make this as interactive as possible towards the end. So with that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce Laura Nevitt, the Executive Director of Keystone Progress Education Fund, and one of the people who's leading the work in Pennsylvania to make sure that we have a livable wage for all. Laura?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Penn Policy Center, for putting this together and inviting us to have a conversation about a living wage in Pennsylvania, which is long overdue. And we are proud to be one of the leads on this. A year, what is it, Saru now? A year and a half ago, it feels like some days it feels like yesterday, some days it feels like a lifetime ago. They, called up and said, what is it going to take to get a living wage? And I had a very C4 answer, so I can't give it here, but. We said, but at the bare minimum, we have to start organizing in our communities, talking about a living wage in Pennsylvania, what that means to workers and all workers, and we can't leave anybody behind. And of course, we both lamented the fact that we had been working on this issue since Fight for 15 began, or even before Fight for 15 began, and that was. We are way past Fight for 15, and it was time for a living wage for all workers. And as Rep. Rabb pointed out, this is about sub-minimum wage, time to be done. I don't know if all y'all know that Pennsylvania is still a state that has disability waivers, which means folks with a disability get paid by the piece they make, which is awful. Our incarcerated workers, timberers, every worker in Pennsylvania deserves a living wage. Period. And no exceptions, no compromise anymore. And let's get it done so that we can stop talking about this and move on to other issues. I don't know why this is so hard, but apparently it is. But we're here to make sure that we spread the word and have conversations in Pennsylvania, that this work is happening. Besides the federal bill, Rep. Rabb introduced a bill last year in the House. Two more bills were introduced this year, although not nearly as comprehensive as Rep. Rabb's bill. But we've got to do the work now of building our power in our communities that demand from our elected officials that they pass a living wage. And so that is what we're here to do. And we're happy to do it. I'm going to put a link in the chat, which is if you have an organization that wants to sign on to the coalition here in Pennsylvania, please join us. We would love to have you. The more that there are of us, the easier this work is. And we know that in any sort of organizing that the power is in the numbers. And so we hope that you will join us in this effort as we push forward to get a living wage in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for that information, and thank you for that link in the chat. It is my pleasure now to introduce Saru to join us. She has a slide presentation. We saw this presentation at a meeting in Pittsburgh a few months ago as we were gearing up for this and Next 250 and that work, and it's been exciting to work alongside. And Saru, I'd like to turn it over to you if you're ready to go.
Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Felicity and Laura and everybody for putting this together. Really appreciate it. I wanted to take a step back and share with everybody how this whole Living Wage for All movement came about. How it's grown over the last year, and then yes, I definitely can address some of the myths that are, that have come up over the last many years, many decades, really, around raising the minimum wage. So before I show the slides, I just wanted to explain a little bit about who we are. I lead a national organization called One Fair Wage. And before that, founded and led for 20 years an organization called the Restaurant Opportunity Center. So between the Restaurant Opportunity Center, or ROC, and then One Fair Wage, we've been organizing restaurant workers for 25 years. And what we've learned over this time period is that the restaurant industry is the unfortunately lowest paid industry in America and in Pennsylvania, largest share of minimum wage workers. Also plays an outsized role in the overall minimum wage conversation because of the National Restaurant Association. And we were the ones who uncovered that ugly history that Rep. Rabb explained around the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers being a legacy of slavery that was created to allow restaurants to hire newly freed slaves, Black women in particular, after emancipation, and just have them live on tips. So we had been fighting for many decades to end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers nationally in Pennsylvania. Every time the minimum wage fight came up in Pennsylvania, we were there saying, include the tipped workers, don't leave us out. And sadly, in state after state and at the federal level, we've seen tipped workers thrown under the bus over and over and over again every time the minimum wage goes up. So we realized some years ago that we were never going to be able to actually ensure that tipped workers were included unless we were at the forefront of leading the overall fight to raise the minimum wage, because otherwise we would never be at the table when the decisions were made as to how to negotiate over a minimum wage increase. And so we started becoming very involved in the federal minimum wage fight, worked on the Raise the Wage Act in Congress, both in 2018 and 2021. And then after the pandemic and after 2021, we started asking some of our colleagues who had worked with us on federal minimum wage, SEIU International, AFL-CIO, NELP, the National Employment Law Project, well, what is our collective vision? Because clearly it can't be the fight for 15 anymore. That is not enough to live on anywhere in the US. It's not inspiring. It's not what we need. And so we held a series of visioning sessions with the National Employment Law Project, SEIU, and others. NEA was a part of that. And what emerged from that is this idea of a living wage for all. And now I'll start to share my slides. So the idea of a living wage for all that we came up with since 2022, 2023 is the idea that it's a minimum wage that gets workers closer to the cost of living, which at this point, according to the MIT Living Wage Calculator, is actually no less than $25 an hour anywhere in the US. And higher in higher cost regions like New York and California, it's $30 an hour. So a living wage, a minimum wage that gets us closer to the actual cost of living, which, by the way, was the original idea that FDR put forward in creating a federal minimum wage. If you look back at his speeches around what is a minimum wage in the US, he said it is the least anybody in the country would need to meet the cost of living. And at this point, that is 25 anywhere in the US, 30 in higher cost regions, and then for all, ending all exemptions, not just for tipped workers, but also workers with disabilities, youth, and the last exemption that is also a legacy of slavery, which is for incarcerated workers. So this was the vision. Many of the national groups that met said this is what we think we need, but it wasn't going anywhere until April of last year, when this was one of 3 articles that came out in USA Today documenting a rumor video that the right was circulating among MAGA voters saying that Donald Trump had already raised the federal minimum wage to $25 an hour, which is crazy. Donald Trump definitely has not raised the minimum wage. But what was striking to me was not that they lied. The right is lying all day long, every day. What was striking was that they used the number 25. They did not say he raised it to 15 or 17, which is where Bernie Sanders has been stuck at. They use the number 25, which is the least you need to live on anywhere in the US. And so when we saw this, we said, oh my God, there's a five alarm fire. You can see this tweet that just came out like 2 months ago by Jason Calacanis, who's a Trump acolyte, somebody very close to the Trump family, saying, prediction, President Trump raises the minimum wage and wins the midterm, such an obvious power move. They are agitating their base, saying that they are going to raise the minimum wage. And there's a real problem here. I don't think they will. They're not going to, but they are co-opting the issue from us and getting ahead of us and putting out numbers that are actually appealing to people as opposed to numbers like 15 and 17. So we saw this. We said we have a 5 alarm fire. We ended up holding an emergency gathering of the minimum wage movement. We brought people from 15 states together to LA last June. Laura was there. Rep. Rabb was there, which is where he got the idea to introduce the Living Wage for All bill in the state of Pennsylvania. And out of that convening, we now have bills and ballot measures moving in 9 states across the country. 2 weeks after our gathering, Zoran ran on 30 by 30 and won the primary in New York. So $30 is advancing in LA, where I live here in the Bay Area, Alameda County, and New York and Hawaii. 27 is moving in Illinois. 25 is moving in Michigan, DC. Laura's been leading the work in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and we have a group of amazing high school students in Nome, Alaska, who have filed a petition for $25 an hour, Inuit Inuit girls, 18-year-olds in Nome, Alaska, who have filed a petition for 25 to be on the ballot this November. And then, of course, the federal bill we've been talking about here. So we've been working for now almost a year to get Congress members to introduce the Living Wage for All Act, which they finally did. It was led by Rep. Delia Ramirez, along with Ana Lilia Mejia, who actually co-founded this whole effort with me. The first person I called when I was like, we have a 5-alarm fire, look at these USA Today articles, was Ana Lilia. She was the executive director of Popular Democracy at the time, started the whole thing, and then 3 months later told me, I think I'm going to run for Congress. Ran for Congress, won running on a $25 living wage for all. And like this was the first bill, like I would say 2 days after she was sworn in, she was standing there with Rep. Ramirez and Chuy Garcia and Congresswoman Latifah Simon from the Bay Area, who co-led the introduction of this bill. And of course, Deluzio is one of the 30 now co-sponsors. The bill has been endorsed by over 100 organizations nationally, including the Steering Committee of Living Wage for All nationally is One Fair Wage, NAACP, Policy Link, NEA, and Popular Democracy. But the bill has been endorsed by SEIU International, AFT, NEA, the National Urban League, Unidos, and so many other, RWDSU, and so many other, both civil rights, economic justice, unions, women's organizations now, so many others. It's really, really exciting. We did polling on the issue with Celinda Lake, one of the top pollsters in the country. We found that across all red, blue, and purple states, $25 is super popular, as we saw from those articles agitating the MAGA base. They are very into this issue. In fact, we find that when we say in polling, oh, it's going to make prices go up, support goes up. The response from polling respondents is, what are you talking about? Prices have already gone up. The only thing that hasn't gone up are my wages. So we saw 57 to 29 across red, blue, and purple states for 25. We saw 3-1, 66 to 21 for $30 across the high cost regions, New York, Chicago, LA, and the Bay. This is the Bay Area, which is going to be the first place in the country to pass $30 this November. 71 to 23 across even the very red regions of this county. And I just want you to look at this you expect higher numbers among young people, Democrats, women, people of color. 77% support among seniors. We're seeing this all across the country. And when I'm out collecting signatures, I talk to seniors who are like, my kids will never leave the house because they cannot afford to get their own place. And new data showing that young people are increasingly saying, I don't think we're ever going to have kids because I can't imagine a future where I can afford my own place and have a family. So it's really both comical and tragic that we're seeing both seniors and young people unite around this intergenerational issue. And I just want to say, why we think this is so urgent and critical is that everybody's talking affordability, 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 and somehow only talking about prices going down. We're going to, have affordable childcare, housing, healthcare, cut the cost of energy, all of which is wonderful and critical, don't get me wrong, but impossible to actually address the ever increasing cost of living without also putting more money in people's pockets. It's just a pipe dream that we're going to somehow reduce you can look at the last 75 years of inflation here at this chart. It's never happened that prices go down or backwards on the whole. And so we really need to put more money in people's pockets, particularly if you look at the last 6 years since the pandemic. You can see the slope of the line is literally double what it's been in the last 75 years. When we say there's an affordability crisis, it means costs have increased year by year at a higher rate than we've ever seen in U.S. history. And in terms of opposition, look, first I want to say something that Rep. Deluzio mentioned in his video. All of the bills were moving around the country. All of the living wage for all bills were moving around the country at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. All have big businesses go much faster and smaller businesses with a much longer timeline. So the 3 places we think we can win this year is Alameda County, $30 for all, including incarcerated workers, 25 on the ballot in DC, and 25 on the ballot in Nome, Alaska, with more places hopefully passing next 27, 28. Maybe we'd have a chance at moving the federal bill in 29. So I do want to say that is the number one response. We are giving a much longer timeline to small businesses. But in terms of the small business argument, which the opposition loves to elevate, what we've seen data-wise is that higher wage states, particularly in the restaurant industry, which is the industry that often raises this, actually have much higher rates of small business growth than states with lower wages. So I'll just take Pennsylvania as an example and compare it to California, which has right now $16.50 for all workers, including tipped workers, including restaurant workers, and Pennsylvania's at $2.83 for tipped workers. So you're talking about an 8 times differential. Small business restaurants in California are growing nearly 3 times as fast as Pennsylvania small business restaurants. And when you talk to small businesses, they will tell you that we have about 1,000 that are part of our coalition. They will tell you, well, we need people to earn enough to be able to support us and eat out. And so that's why small businesses grow faster in states that have higher wages. We see higher retention, we see higher consumer support. We have a slower phase in. We've created training and toolkits for small businesses to show them how to make the transition to a living wage profitably. And we have a ton of small businesses that have worked with us on these policies. Another myth that comes up is that prices are going to go way up. We just did a comprehensive study as an example here in Alameda County of a $30 proposal going from $16.50 to $30. We saw over that phase in, at most, consumer prices would go up by 0.9%, less than 1%, while workers' wages would go up 21%. And so we have studied consumer price, inflation that's a result of wage increases across the country, and it's pretty minimal, and it's because it's not a dollar for dollar increase. It's not like you raise the wage by $1 and prices go up by the dollar. That's not how it works. Every worker serves multiple customers, right? And so the increase for a particular worker is spread out among many, many customers. And look, Target is already at 24, Costco's announced they're going to 30 for their lowest wage worker. Bank of America announced they're going to 25 for their lowest wage worker. I'm sure you all know Costco is affordable. Now, in terms of job loss, data has shown over and over and over again, this just hasn't happened anywhere. And there have been meta studies because there are, of course, the economists on the right and economists on the left, but even the meta studies show negligible impacts in terms of any real job loss or job gain. The study we just did in Alameda County for $30 actually showed about 1,800 new jobs created through the initiative, but that's considered negligible. So the meta studies show this is just not true. And in terms of this idea that these are unrealistic numbers, 25 and up, economists have recently been putting out a lot of studies showing actually we can go much higher, that in fact the new gold standard that EPI and others have been using is this idea of the minimum wage never exceeding, as long as the minimum wage doesn't exceed 2/3 of the median wage in a state or a region or a country, then you're not going to see job loss or negative effects on the economy. And all of the bills we've studied looking at 25, 27, 30 never exceed, over the course of their phase in, never exceed more than 2/3 of the median wage. And the last piece I just want to say is they talk about, oh, you increase the wage, you're going to see robots everywhere. First of all, we've never seen this happen. They've been saying this for decades, and it's not happened. Many restaurant industry attempts at technology like iPads at the tables or robots or automated restaurants have flopped. In fact, just as an example, some of the Olive Garden type restaurants tried to introduce iPads at the tables and they got such negative responses from customers they had to pull them back because customers I want a human. Panera tried to introduce kiosks for ordering. They ended up having to hire 10,000 new workers to help people use the kiosks. And the most comprehensive research is finding negligible employment effects with regard to AI and technology. So it's just not happening. Overall, I just want to close by saying, look, Right now, we feel like this is so much more than just about wages and an affordability crisis. We are hearing from so many of our members, 14 million restaurant workers across the country. You want me to come to a rally on Saturday to save democracy while I work 3 jobs and I earn $2.83 in Pennsylvania. What has democracy done for me lately? And we've heard this so often that we feel like it's so critical right now to prove that democracy can deliver on the top issue voters keep telling us is their priority, which is the cost of living, in order to prove that democracy is in fact worth saving.
So incredible. Can we show some love for Saru in this presentation? Was amazing. This is what we saw last time, and definitely wanted to bring to everyone here. It's incredible work. It connects to all the things that we are thinking about right now in Pennsylvania, in this country, when it comes to affordability. Just incredible presentation and such great information too. Thank you so much for that. So this is a great time, and I see that there are some questions coming in the chat. This is a great time for you to get your question in the chat. I'm sure there were some things you were thinking about, hearing all those details in the presentation from all of our speakers as well. So please take the time. We have some time here, so let's dig in excuse me, to some of these questions. Jeff, I'd like to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Dwayne. And thank you to all of our panelists today. This was really informative and in some cases kind of infuriating to realize the way that people are being exploited. So we have a number of questions here. My name is Jeff. I am the Outreach and Partnerships Director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. And we are encouraging folks to put questions in the chat. We will get to as many of them as we can. I have a couple here that we're going to get started with. If you do have a question for a specific panelist, please note that as well. But I'm also asking panelists as we do these questions to raise a hand if they want to take a stab at one of these answers. First question here comes from Susanna, who wants to know, where is the organized opposition to raising wages coming from? Saru?
Sure, I can start, and then I see Laura raising her hand too.
No,
Look,
I was just going to say, passing it off to you.
okay.
Because I commented to her in the chat that the Restaurant Association.
That's right. The National Restaurant Association is the primary source of all opposition to raising wages. And I do want to thank you for the question. It's such a good question because people need to understand like not only where this comes from, but even how they do this. So the National Restaurant Association basically organizes all other employers to fight wage increases, not just for restaurant workers and tipped workers, but all workers. And they have been after me and us for 25 years. They put my children's pictures up on attack websites. They follow me around the country. I get death threats. We had people show up at the house in 2024 and scare our kids. We had to move for a while. It's been there are bullies. They are violent bullies. We call them the other NRA. And it's led by the chains, the IHOPs, the Denny's, the Applebee's. So for, a good 15 years of doing this work and them coming after me, I thought the money for the opposition was coming from Applebee's, IHOP. That's where they got all their money. Well, turns out 2018 there was a very ugly, again, they had put my kids' pictures up on attack websites, very ugly attacks on us. Somebody inside the other NRA leaked me some emails that I wasn't supposed to see where they were bragging to each other. Oh, it's so great. We don't even pay for this lobbying to fight against wage increases. Turns out in the emails, they admitted that the majority of their $80 million a year lobbying budget to fight wage increases across the country doesn't come from the member corporations. It comes from workers, where they set up this company called ServeSafe. They've gone around the country getting every state or most states and counties to require workers to take food safety training, food handler training, and pay for it themselves. And they happen to own the monopoly food handler training company called ServeSafe. And so every year, 14 million workers across the country pay for training that they don't know is then they take their money and they use it to lobby against their own wage increases, without the workers knowing. So when we learn this, we're like, this is sadistic and genius because they're just raking in the money with an online training. And so we both worked to expose it. We got an article in the New York Times, which I'll put in the chat. We've also created an alternative food safety training program that can take money away from the Restaurant Association and bring it to the worker movement. I will put the link to that in the chat. And so any restaurant workers, or restaurant owners who are conscious, we hope that you'll get them to use this instead of ServSafe. But that is where the primary opposition comes from. I just want to say one more thing, which is sadly, to be honest with you, the kind of rolling over to the Restaurant Association is not unique to one party. It is pretty much all elected officials, except for people like Rep. Rabb and Rep. Deluzio, who roll over to the Restaurant Association. And sadly, that is how we lost the federal fight in 2021. That year, if you remember, Kristen Sinema did a thumbs down on the Raise the Wage Act in Congress, if you remember that. Well, guess who keynoted the National Restaurant Association conference that year? It was Sinema and Manchin. And so it is often Democrats who are killing minimum wage by rolling over to the Restaurant Association, certainly Democrats who are kicking out the tipped workers at the request of the Restaurant Association.
Thank you so much for that thorough answer. As I noted in the chat, it's good to know who your adversaries are and who your opponents are and what motivates them and why they're doing this. Thanks so much for that great question from Susanna. I also want to note that our friend Jess from up in Northeast Pennsylvania has noted, as someone who spent 20 years in the restaurant industry before becoming a professional organizer, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the consideration of restaurant workers in this important fight. And thank you to, I'm sure, a lot of folks who've worked those kinds of jobs who are standing up now and speaking out. I'm going to take a few more questions here. We've got also a comment there in the chat from our friend Richie in Western Pennsylvania, noting that Patriotic Millionaires had a livable wage post on LinkedIn a few days ago, and they got some very hateful and negative messaging from a payday lender of all things. So thank you for noting that, Richie. A couple other questions here. So one question is, how many states in the country have actually eliminated the tipped wage entirely? And if they haven't, are there other states that have made significant progress in chipping away at that?
Yeah, so 7 states have eliminated the subminimum wage for tipped workers altogether: California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska. So not all blue states. Some purple, some red states have gotten rid of that subminimum wage for tipped workers, and the data shows restaurant industries are booming in all 7 states. Then we also got it passed in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it's been very successful in that little town that's right outside the Grand Canyon, which is a hospitality tourist town. We got it passed in Washington, D.C., and the D.C. Council rolled over to the Restaurant Association and has tried to freeze the increase to a full minimum wage, but we're back on the ballot with a $25 initiative that includes tipped workers. So DC will continue to go to one fair wage, full minimum wage with tips on top. We passed this in Chicago, and it's still going forward in Chicago to a full minimum wage with tips on top. Chicago in 2023 became the largest city in the country to end the subminimum wage for tipped workers. We also got it passed in Michigan. And then very sadly, and this was to an example of what I just said, Governor Whitmer struck a deal with Republicans and the Restaurant Association to roll back the win for all workers to $15 back to $7.50 for tipped workers. So we're fighting the good fight in Michigan to bring it back, but we have won this. It's done in 7 states plus Flagstaff, Chicago. We're bringing it back in DC and Michigan, and there are a number of other places where it's moving as well.
That is so great to hear, Saru. And follow up on that, and you maybe alluded to this a little bit as you answered that, but what can we learn here in Pennsylvania from other states about how to go about addressing and fighting back against this tipped minimum wage?
Yeah, it's something that I think Rep Rabb started this whole conversation with, which is being bold and aggressive. You know, what we're finding right now is that workers are just sick of the way in which I'm just going to be honest. Our side has a tendency to negotiate against itself before we even get in the room. And so we will cut our own. We'll say, "Oh, we just need 15. Oh, we it can be over a very long timeline. Oh, and what we have found in place after place, Jeff, is when the opposition is willing to be so radical, right? They're willing to say, honestly, they're willing to say there shouldn't be a minimum wage at all. I have heard that from so many people on the right. I've debated Republicans on, podcasts who are like, there shouldn't be a minimum wage. It should be left to capitalism and the market. So if they're willing to be that radical and our side is negotiating against ourselves before we get in the room, where do we end up? We end up at $7. If they're at 0 and we're at 15, we end up at $7. If we're fighting for what we actually need, and can I just, because you all are here, can I just show you what people in Pennsylvania actually need? Maybe you've already seen this, but if I could just take 1 second this is Pennsylvania as a whole, per the MIT living wage. And by the way, people think of MIT as not necessarily, the actually a true living wage because it's just the basics. But the measure we look at is one adult in a two-parent, two-child household. That's the most conservative measure. You would need $29.80 anywhere in Pennsylvania to survive. If you're a single parent, forget it. You need $38. But even one adult with no children, 15 is so low. 17 is so low. You're talking about $23 even for a single adult with no children. We feel like that's the wrong measure because that's assuming that we don't want to allow people to have kids, which I hope we want to let people have kids. So my point in all of this is to say we've got to be bold. What we've learned from other states is that if the right is saying, pull it back or do nothing, and we're at 15, we're going to end up at 7. But if the right is saying 0 and we say, well, look at what we actually need, it's above $30 if you have a kid, maybe we'll get somewhere close to what we need, like 25. So it is about what we call opening the Overton window. And particularly in this moment when most of the people I represent hate all politicians from all parties. They think they're all sellouts and they're all just not standing up for us. We need to show that pro-democracy forces can be bold in asking for what people actually need.
Thank you so much for that excellent and thorough answer, Saru. I want to note for folks. Oh, go ahead, Laura. I was just about to ask if you wanted to.
Yeah, I was just going to tag on to the being bold part because she is absolutely right. And that is why when I mentioned earlier the two newest minimum wage bills that got introduced in the state and the House did exactly what we didn't want. They were not bold. And so they gave away the game before it even started. And none of them address incarcerated workers, uh, leave youth workers where they're at, doesn't address disability waiver, doesn't address incarcerated workers, and only slightly increases tip workers. And so it didn't get us anywhere. It moved move the ball down the field ever so slightly, but it's just not enough. And it's not bold enough, and it's just not what workers in Pennsylvania need. It doesn't help our economy. It doesn't help any of it. And so this is where I'm just backing up her words that it is time for us to be bold and courageous in this fight around this particular issue, and just not compromising about it anymore. And that's where we're at. So I was just backing up what she was
Yeah,
saying.
that is great. And yeah, it really is helpful. And this is why we bring together folks from both the state and the national level to talk about this, because there are things we know there are going on here in Pennsylvania, and there are things that are going on across the country, and we want to bring it all together. I want to note, we're going to do one last quick question here. Then I'm going to go to both of our panelists for any final thoughts they have, kick it back over to Dwayne to kind of wrap up the meeting here today. I want to note that when we talk about the minimum wage, sometimes I hear people in Pennsylvania say, Pennsylvania hasn't raised the minimum wage since 2009. The truth is, Pennsylvania hasn't raised the minimum wage since 2006. That was the last time we had any activity at the state level to raise the minimum wage. And in 2006, 20 years ago, 2 decades ago, they raised it to $7.15. The only reason workers in Pennsylvania get $7.25 an hour, if they're not tipped workers, is because the federal minimum wage kicked in 2009. If Pennsylvania could have its way, our state government would probably still be paying people too little. So I want to ask a question here, which is, how many other states are still at the federal minimum wage for $7.25 an hour?
It's about 20 states. We are talking about mostly the South, and few other states, but it's mainly the South. So yes, Pennsylvania is very far behind, but I don't think that is a reason to say, because I hear some response to that being, well, we at least need to catch up to our neighbors, so that's why we should fight for 15, which I understand. I think you have to think about it in 2 ways. One, if we're not even getting 15, then shouldn't we be fighting for what we really need? One, and the states around you, like New York is moving 30, right? Maryland is doing 25, DC is doing 25. Like, that's not the right number. But second, the bigger question is, we have an election this year. What is going to motivate voters? Is it 15 or is it a living wage? And I think we all know the answer to that.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to go to you next, Laura, to offer some closing remarks, and then we'll come back to Saru and we'll come over to you. So go ahead, Laura. Why don't you chime in here too?
I wasn't raising my hand. I was giving her you got it, girl.
Okay. Well, now I've revealed my card, so I do want to come to you.
I am just going to say, and I'm going to put it back. Oh, I'm going to put it back in the chat. The link again. We are building out the coalition and the work to get to a living wage in Pennsylvania, and we need as many partners as we can get at the table and be having this conversation included in their work, as we know that every organization has their particular focus, and so we want to make sure that living wages are part of your conversation, and helping us move this ball forward. So I just put the link in there again. It's an organizational sign up, so not quite ready for individuals, but if your organization is interested in being part of the Living Wage Coalition here in Pennsylvania, please go to that link and fill out that form, and we will loop you into what is already, we've got ongoing monthly calls that happen around state level, and I do want to point out that Sarah, I don't know if you want to talk about quickly the DC events coming up in June, the end of June. I'll lead her to those. But
yeah, thank you. Is this the right time, Jeff? Or
yep, this would be great. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm so excited to invite everybody here. I should have said it earlier, but we are having, first of all, the launch of the Senate bill with Senator Chris Murphy is happening on June 25th. And Senator Murphy their team has already reached out. They've gotten a number of other senators on board. If you all would like to reach out to your senators and encourage them to sign on, I can definitely send Felicity and Dwayne the materials so you can send it out to everybody to follow up with your senators and see if they'd be willing to sign on. But Thursday, June 25th at noon is the launch of the Senate bill on Capitol Hill, if people would like to join. Then Saturday, the 27th, is a huge mass mobilization in DC. We have been part of a huge initiative working with many other organizations around the country, an initiative called Next 250, where we are really using the upcoming 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and have worked with base building groups across the country, many in Pennsylvania, to pull together a Declaration of Interdependence. And Living Wage for All is one of the key pillars, policy pillars tied to that big Next 250. So there's a mass mobilization in Washington, D.C. Saturday, June 27th, which is the week before July 4th. We're trying to get ahead of the kind of Donald Trump parade on July 4th. And put out our vision for what we think the next 250 years of this country should be, one of interdependence and one in which everybody can thrive with a living wage for all. So we're hoping you might consider joining us either on Thursday for the Senate bill launch or on Saturday, for the huge, very inspiring mass mobilization where we'll be demonstrating that we as a country are much more united around issues like living wage for all than people in power would like us to believe.
Thank you so much for that, Saru. This is exactly the reason why we hold these meetings, is to educate people, but also to give people opportunities to take action. And we're really pleased that you're here helping to lead that effort. I'm going to note very quickly that we will have our state policy action meeting coming up 2 weeks from today at 1 p.m. On the 18th. Our focus is going to be on the state budget. As you know, we have a state budget that needs to be enacted by July 1st. We're going to be getting updates on critical priorities like education, public transportation, and how we raise revenue fairly. So we'll get the information out to all of you so you can register for that too. Again, thanks to our panelists. And I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague here, Dwayne.
Thank you, Jeff. I think everyone on this call, you can now see why we were excited about bringing this to all of you. Our mission here, in addition to making sure that Pennsylvanians thrive, is to not preach to the choir, but to actually expand the congregation, which we have been doing. And one of the thoughts that bubbled up for me, in addition to the breaking news about the Senate introducing a bill on the federal level, is that, this is an issue that's not just about affordability being cost, but it's also about income. It's about raising the income for folks. It's about revenue. And it makes me think about our For Our Commonwealth campaign, because just like we have to manage our own households, the state has to manage their budget, and a responsible budget also requires looking at revenue. And so I dropped in the chat the link where you can join that campaign of For Our Commonwealth, which is making sure that we can have a state that prospers. And right now, since Jeff, your call in 2 weeks is so timely with the budget for us to be doubling down on this. So if you have not yet signed up for the campaign, please do that so we can let our legislators know that you're in support of a Pennsylvania that's actually thriving, that's actually raising the revenue that we need for everyday Pennsylvanians. So with that, we are over time here. I want to thank you for joining us. Big shout out to our speakers and to my team at the Pennsylvania Policy Center for knocking this out. And we hope to see you in 2 weeks or even before then if you're able to join in on the campaign. Thank you so much.